Imagine walking into your grocery store one night to find everything perfectly in place. The shelves stocked, the lights flickering above, and the aisles empty. But as you turn the corner, you hear it. Footsteps heavy and deliberate echoing behind you. You freeze, the hairs on the back of your neck standing up, but when you turn around, no one is there. Suddenly, the cans on the shelf begin to shift, rearranging themselves into perfect rows all by themselves. That's not just a ghost story. It's my reality at Blackwood Grocery, a place where the dead continue to work alongside the living, and the curse that binds us all has been lurking for over 200 years. Are you ready to dive deeper into the terrifying truth behind Blackwood Grocery? Well, if you think you can handle it, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for more spine-chilling stories. Trust me, you don't want to miss what comes next. The dead have been waiting for you. Part 1. The new hire at Blackwood Grocery. I never thought my first job would lead me into something like this. A grocery store, right? Stock shelves help customers go home. Simple, normal, or so I thought. That's how I ended up at Blackwood Grocery, a 200-year-old store in the heart of Salem, Massachusetts. Sure, it was a bit of a dive, a place where time seemed to stand still, but it was a paycheck. What I didn't know was that it was a place where time doesn't just stand still, it's trapped. It was my first day, and I was assigned to work as a stock boy, helping the old man in charge, Joe, with the aisles and the loading docks. Joe had been at Blackwood for longer than anyone could remember. He was a burly guy, gruff and quiet, with a face that looked like it had seen too many things. He said very little about the store's history, and for good reason. Nobody wanted to know. I mean, who really cared, right? It was just a job. The building itself was, well, ancient. You could smell the dust and mildew the moment you walked in. The floorboards creaked with every step, as if they were groaning in protest of the years they'd endured. The air was stale, like it hadn't been properly ventilated in decades. But the most unsettling part, the lights. They flickered constantly, casting long, strange shadows across the aisles. I remember thinking that if I didn't know better, I'd swear the place had a life of its own. I checked in with Joe at the front desk. He gave me a quick nod and motioned to the back storage room. "Start with the dry goods section," he grumbled, clearly not one for small talk. We got a lot of restocking to do. As I wandered down the dark aisles, I could feel the weight of the building pressing down on me. Each step I took seemed louder than it should have been. There was a low hum in the background, like the fridge units or the lights, or maybe it was just the constant, unsettling feeling that I wasn't alone in this place. But that was nothing compared to the feeling that came over me when I passed aisle 7. It's funny how you remember the smallest things. Aisle 7 had canned goods, just like any other aisle. But for some reason, it was the quietest place in the store. No matter what time of day you walked through it, it was always cold. Not like a regular grocery store chill, but a bone-deep, creeping cold that you couldn't shake. The lights above flickered more violently here, casting odd shadows that never seemed to quite align with anything. I tried to brush it off, focusing on my task. Stacking cans, organizing the labels, making sure the inventory was right. But every time I glanced up, I caught the faintest glimpse of something, just a blur in my peripheral vision, moving at the far end of the aisle. Probably just a rat or some draft, I told myself. That was until I heard the footsteps. At first I thought it was just Joe or another coworker walking around. But when I looked up, I realized the store was completely empty. There was no one around. The footsteps continued, slow and deliberate, echoing in the emptiness. They were heavy, like boots dragging across the floor. But it wasn't just one set of footsteps. It was as if someone was pacing behind me, matching my every movement, keeping time with my footsteps. I froze. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I looked down at the aisle, but there was nothing there. The sound of those footsteps, they were coming from right behind me, and I knew it wasn't just my imagination. "Hello." I called out, trying to mask the rising panic in my voice. "Stores closed. You need to leave." The footsteps stopped. Silence. I stood there waiting for an answer. Nothing came. I must have stood there for a good 5 minutes before I even dared to turn around. When I did, I saw nothing. No one. No footprints, no strange figures, just a cold, eerie emptiness. I let out a sigh of relief, shaking my head. I'm just stressed. It's my first day. Nothing's here. But then I looked at the shelves in front of me and the relief vanished. The cans I just stacked, perfectly stacked, had shifted. Not a few, all of them. The cans had been arranged, not in the mess I had left them in, but in perfect rows, each one carefully aligned by height, size, and brand. The way they were positioned wasn't random. It was organized, almost military style. The labels were all facing the same direction. I stood there, completely dumbfounded. I had just walked down that aisle. There was no way someone had been there after I left and before I turned back. I checked the security cameras the next morning. The footage showed me walking through the store, alone. But when I reached aisle 7, the footage was nothing but a blur. It was as though the cans had moved on their own. There was no one else in the frame, but the cans were undeniably rearranged by an invisible hand. It wasn't just me. I wasn't the only one experiencing these things. Later that night, I decided to ask Sarah about it. She had worked at Blackwood for years. When I told her about the cans, her face grew pale. "Oh, it's not just you," she said, her voice low. "The store, it does things. Strange things. You'll get used to it. Don't fight it. Just stay out of its way." And that was it. No more explanation. No reassurance. As I left for the night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the store was watching me, that something was waiting. I never expected my first day at Blackwood Grocery to be the beginning of something much, much darker. Something far beyond what I ever imagined when I accepted the job. Something I couldn't escape if I wanted to. If you think this place is creepy now, just wait until you hear the next story. You won't believe what happened in the deli counter, or the midnight orders that are still placed by customers who haven't been alive for over a century. Make sure you subscribe and turn on the notification bell, because the next part of this haunting tale is coming, and you don't want to miss it. Trust me. Part 2. The first night alone. The next few days at Blackwood Grocery passed in a haze of uncertainty. The strange occurrences that plagued the aisles, the flickering lights, and the sudden cold spots, it all started to wear on me. But I brushed it off. After all, it was just my imagination running wild, right? I was wrong. It was my first solo shift, and despite the unease creeping up my spine, I was determined to prove myself. The store was eerily quiet, as it always was after hours. The only sound was the distant hum of the refrigerators and the low, rhythmic beep of the fluorescent lights above. The usual sounds of a bustling store had faded away, replaced by a suffocating silence that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. The clock ticked past 9 p.m. and the doors locked automatically. The store was mine. The aisles stretched out in front of me, like a maze I had to navigate alone, with nothing but the cold glow of overhead lights to guide me. I started by pushing my cart down the first aisle, the canned goods aisle. Everything seemed normal, at least for the first few minutes. The familiar, musty smell of the store lingered in the air, and the rows of neatly arranged products stood like silent soldiers, awaiting their next customer. But then it happened again, the footsteps. I heard them, soft but unmistakable, coming from behind me. I turned, but the aisle was empty. No one, nothing. Just the towering shelves lined with cans. I chalked it up to the wind or maybe the air conditioning. But as I continued walking, the footsteps grew louder, closer, until they were right behind me. I spun around. Nothing. "Hello?" I called out, my voice shaky. I hoped it would break the silence, calm my nerves. But there was no response, just the endless emptiness. I gripped my flashlight tighter, its beam casting strange shadows along the aisle. With every step I took, the footsteps echoed, always a fraction of a second behind mine. It felt like someone was following me, a presence too close to ignore, a presence that had been there far longer than I had. I stepped into the next aisle, my breath catching in my throat. The footsteps stopped, but something was wrong. The air felt different. The usual cold, sterile chill of the grocery store had thickened, as if the atmosphere itself had grown heavier. I could almost feel it pressing in on me. And then I saw it. At the far end of the aisle, the metal shelving unit seemed to shudder, as though it was caught in a tremor. The cans, which had once been lined up perfectly, were now shaking, shaking on their own. I took a step forward, my heart racing, but I was rooted to the spot. I watched in horror as the shelves trembled more violently, and one by one, the cans moved. Slowly, methodically, as if guided by invisible hands. They began to rearrange themselves, sliding across the metal bars, shifting into neat, organized rows. I knew I hadn't touched them. I was certain of it. The cans, once haphazardly scattered, now sat perfectly aligned, their labels all facing outward. The movement stopped as suddenly as it had started, leaving behind a completely reorganized aisle. But something even more terrifying happened next. As my eyes flicked to the end of the aisle, I saw her. A figure stood at the far end, just beyond the flickering light. A woman. Her face was pale, almost sickly white, her clothes dark and flowing, like she had stepped out of another time. Her eyes were hollow, black voids staring directly at me. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. My body was frozen in terror, my breath shallow and quick, my chest tight with an inexplicable pressure. The woman didn't speak. She didn't move. She simply stood there, staring at me with a gaze that felt like it could pierce through to my very soul. I blinked, and she was gone. Just vanished. I stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the cart, my hands shaking uncontrollably. I tried to steady myself, my heart pounding in my ears. The air seemed to grow even colder, and the shadows in the aisles stretched longer, warping in impossible shapes. "Okay," I whispered to myself, struggling to stay calm. "This isn't real. This is just stress. It's just a bad dream." But even as I said the words, I could feel a presence around me. It was real. It wasn't my imagination. I grabbed my phone, hands trembling, and tried to call Joe. But before I could dial, I heard it again, the footsteps. This time closer, faster, almost like they were running toward me. I spun around, expecting to see something, anything. But there was nothing. The store was as silent as ever. Then the lights flickered, and in the sudden, eerie half-darkness, I saw it. A flash of movement, a shadow darting across the aisle, just at the corner of my vision. I was sure I wasn't imagining it. I was sure I saw someone move, someone who didn't belong. Suddenly, a loud bang echoed from the back of the store, so loud it shook the shelves. I jumped, the flashlight slipping from my hand and skidding across the floor. My heart nearly stopped as I looked toward the source of the noise, the freezer room. I had no choice but to go check. The noise had come from behind that door, the one that led to the back stockroom. The same door that was always locked at night. I moved slowly, my legs like lead as I approached the freezer. The handle was cold to the touch, like ice had formed on it, even though the room wasn't refrigerated. I twisted it, the door creaking open, the scent of something rotten filling the air. Inside, it was darker than usual. My flashlight barely cut through the thick gloom. As I stepped forward, the light flickered and hummed, casting strange shadows on the walls. I froze when I saw the freezer's contents. Frozen in the center of the room was a figure, a man, or what was left of him. His body was wrapped in old, dusty clothes, the skin translucent and decayed. His mouth hung open in an eternal scream, his eyes wide and bulging, staring at nothing. He was chained to the floor by rusted metal cuffs, his body held in place by the same eerie force that had moved the cans in aisle 7. The worst part, the freezer wasn't cold anymore. The air around it was still, too still, and the body was still fresh. I staggered back, my heart racing, my mind screaming at me to run. But before I could turn, I heard that voice again, low, hollow, like it was coming from the walls themselves. "You shouldn't have opened the door. I barely made it out of there alive." I ran to the back office, locked the door behind me, and collapsed into a chair, gasping for air. My fingers shook as I called Joe. He didn't answer. I looked out the window of the office, and for the briefest moment I thought I saw her again. The woman in the dark dress, standing at the edge of the parking lot, staring at me with those hollow eyes. But when I blinked, she was gone. The store was empty again, but I knew something was waiting for me in the shadows. I wasn't sure what it was or who it was, but I was certain of one thing: I was never alone at Blackwood Grocery. Part 3: Unearthly Visitors. I had no idea what I was getting myself into when I agreed to stay for my third shift at Blackwood Grocery. But when I walked in that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed. The air was different, thicker, like it was absorbing every sound I made, muffling my presence. The store was quieter than usual, too quiet. And yet in the silence, the walls seemed to whisper. As I made my way through the aisles, the soft hum of the lights above was replaced by a low, almost imperceptible scraping noise. It came from the floor, like nails dragging across concrete. My heartbeat quickened as I tried to convince myself that it was just the building settling, just the typical weird sounds of an old store. But there was something distinctly wrong about it. The sound was too deliberate, too unnatural. I pushed through the produce section, my flashlight flickering as I walked past the stacked boxes of fruit and vegetables. The moment I passed the old fruit stand, I noticed something strange: the apples. They were all arranged in perfect, concentric circles, as if someone had meticulously placed each one with supernatural care. At first, I thought it was one of the other employees playing a joke on me, but the chill in the air said otherwise. There was no one in sight. I knelt to adjust the apples, but as soon as my fingers brushed against the cold skin of one, it rolled away as if alive. It tumbled off the counter, hit the floor with a soft thud, and then rolled back into place. My eyes went wide as I watched it. Before I could react, I heard it, the unmistakable sound of footsteps, heavy and deliberate, echoing behind me. I whipped around, expecting to see someone. Nothing. The aisle behind me was still. Too still, but I could feel it creeping in from the corners of the room, the presence. The feeling that something or someone was watching me. I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. I wasn't sure if I was losing my mind, but I felt a growing weight on my chest. I couldn't shake the sensation that the store was breathing, as though it were alive. My body tensed, the hairs on my neck standing on end as I slowly turned and walked toward the stockroom. I entered the stockroom cautiously, the shadows seeming to stretch and reach for me. The shelves were lined with boxes and canned goods, but in the corner of the room, a single mason jar stood on a shelf, glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. It caught my attention and I walked over to it, curiosity tugging at me. As my fingers brushed against the glass, a sudden guttural growl filled the air. My heart raced. I spun around. There, standing just beyond the shelves, was a figure. A tall, imposing man, his body wrapped in tattered clothing from another era, his skin pale and mottled as though it had been ravaged by decay. His eyes were black voids, empty and soulless. The man didn't speak. He just stood there, staring. And then, without warning, he reached out with a skeletal hand, pointing at me, as though accusing me of something I couldn't understand. Frozen in terror, I stumbled backward, but the man didn't move. He just stood there, his finger never wavering. And then the growl returned. The sound seemed to come from deep within the walls, rattling the very bones of the store. It echoed in the back of my skull, vibrating through my teeth. And for a split second, everything went dark. The lights overhead blinked, flickered, and then crackled out completely. I was plunged into a suffocating blackness. In the silence that followed, I heard the sound of scraping again. Only this time it was louder, closer. It was as if the walls themselves were coming alive. A sudden flash of light illuminated the stockroom, and in that brief moment I saw them, figures. 5 of them emerging from the darkness, all wearing tattered clothing from long ago. They moved slowly, like they were wading through water, their footsteps dragging and scraping against the concrete. Their faces, if you could call them that, were pale, gaunt things. Hollowed eyes stared at me from sunken sockets, their lips stretched back in grotesque smiles, revealing teeth so yellow they looked like bone fragments. They shuffled closer, but they didn't speak. The growl grew louder, and I felt my chest constrict. It wasn't just a sound, it was an emotion, an overwhelming sense of fear that filled my entire being. It was as though the sound was coming from inside me, inside my own heart, threatening to tear me apart. Suddenly, the figure at the front of the group lunged forward, and I barely had time to react. I threw myself backward, crashing into a shelf, the boxes toppling down onto the floor with a deafening crash. The figure paused for a moment, just staring at me with those black, empty eyes. Then, without warning, it reached into its own chest and pulled out a long, twisted piece of rope, which it flung at me. The rope coiled around my wrist, tightening like a snake. I gasped, struggling against it, but it only tightened more, pulling me toward the figure. The growl became deafening, the air thick with pressure, and I could feel the cold. It wasn't just the temperature, it was the very essence of it. This was a cold that went beyond physical sensations. It was a cold that stole your soul. With every ounce of strength I had left, I pulled at the rope, trying to break free, but it only grew tighter. My vision blurred as I felt the weight of something pressing down on me, pushing me closer to the ground. In a last, desperate act, I screamed, loud, hoping for someone to hear me. But no one did. The sound of my voice seemed to vanish the moment it left my throat, swallowed up by the oppressive darkness of Blackwood Grocery. And then, just as I thought I was about to be swallowed whole by the store, the rope released. I fell backward, landing hard on the cold floor. The figures were gone. The growl faded. The lights flickered back on. I lay there, breathing heavily, my body shaking, unsure of what had just happened. But one thing was clear, the store was not done with me. Part 4. The Spirits Awaken. The air was thick with the kind of silence that makes you feel like you're not alone, even when you know you should be. It wasn't the peaceful quiet that comes after a long day or the calm of a store closing for the night. No, this was different. It felt as if the store itself was holding its breath, waiting for something, waiting for me. It was my 4th night working the late shift at Blackwood Grocery, and by this point, I had seen enough oddities to convince myself that something or someone was watching me. But nothing could have prepared me for what was about to happen. I had been cleaning the aisles, wiping down the shelves, trying to focus on anything other than the cold that had started to creep into my bones. The building had always felt cold at night, but tonight felt different. The temperature was plummeting in ways that didn't make sense. The windows were still sealed tight, and the air conditioning wasn't running, yet the chill remained. I pulled my jacket tighter around myself and continued to work, trying to ignore the growing sense of unease. That's when I heard it. A soft whisper, faint at first, just on the edge of hearing. It was so quiet I thought it was my imagination, but it was. The voice repeated, clearer this time, "Help us." I stopped dead in my tracks, heart pounding. I looked around the store, but it was empty. Dead empty, in fact. No sound, no movement. I told myself it was the wind, the pipes, anything that wasn't my imagination running wild. Yet the longer I stood there, the more real it felt. I crept cautiously toward the source of the whisper. It was coming from the back storage room, a part of the store that I had learned to avoid. No one went back there. It was always cold, smelled of something old and musty, and the lights flickered at the worst possible times. But tonight the whispering called to me. It almost felt like it was pulling me toward the room. I hesitated for a moment, heart racing in my chest. But curiosity and something else, something deeper, urged me to move forward. I grabbed a flashlight, my fingers trembling as I clicked it on, the beam cutting through the thick darkness. The back storage room door creaked open as I pushed it. The cold air hit me first, followed by the unmistakable smell of decay, old wood, metal, and something else, something I couldn't place. The walls of the storage room were stacked with crates and old shelves filled with forgotten merchandise, products that had long since been discontinued or outdated. It was the place where old stock went to be buried and forgotten. I stepped in, the beam of my flashlight flicking over the dusty shelves and piles of crates. Then, just as I was about to leave, I saw something that stopped me in my tracks. At the far end of the room, near the wall that separated the store from the old freezer unit, a dark shape shifted. A figure, or at least a shadow of one, was standing there. It was tall, too tall for a person, its shape wrong, elongated. The figure wasn't fully solid, but a dark silhouette that seemed to flicker in and out of existence. A man, a woman, I couldn't tell. But it was definitely not a shadow I'd ever seen before. The air grew heavier. My heart started pounding in my chest. The flashlight trembled in my hand, and I couldn't bring myself to look away. The figure's eyes, if they could be called eyes, were hollow pits, dark as the void. They seemed to burn into me, pulling me closer. The whisper came again. "Help us. Please help us." My legs refused to move. Every instinct in my body told me to run, but I was paralyzed, rooted in place by fear. The shadow began to move, slowly at first, as though it were testing the air around it. Then, with a sudden jerking motion, it lunged toward me. I screamed, dropping the flashlight as I stumbled backward. The cold in the room seemed to explode, swirling around me like a storm. The whispering turned into an ear-piercing wail, the kind of sound that made my skin crawl and my stomach churn. I turned to flee, but the door to the storage room slammed shut, trapping me inside. I pounded on the door, screaming for help, but no sound escaped my throat. It felt like the walls themselves were closing in, squeezing the life out of me. The wailing grew louder. It was as if the store itself was crying, mourning for something or someone. And then I saw them, the figures, dozens of them emerging from the shadows in the corners of the room. Some were transparent, others more solid, but all of them were wearing clothing from another time, tattered old rags, torn dresses, and faded uniforms. Their faces were twisted in agony, their mouths open in silent screams. Some had no eyes, others had hollow, dead ones staring directly at me. I recognized some of the faces. They were the faces of former employees, people I had heard about in hushed conversations, whispers in the break room. People who had worked at Blackwood Grocery decades ago and had mysteriously disappeared, some under suspicious circumstances. As they closed in on me, Their hands reached out, their fingers crooked and gnarled, begging me for something I couldn't understand. "Help us!" they cried, their voices all layered together in a cacophony of despair. I couldn't breathe. The air was thick with their sorrow, their pain. Their presence was suffocating. My body felt as though it were being crushed under the weight of their misery, the weight of their unfinished business. I closed my eyes, unable to look at their tortured faces any longer. But when I opened them again, I found myself back in the main store, standing in front of the freezer section. The lights were back on. The store was completely silent. Had it all been a dream? A hallucination? I didn't know. My mind felt fractured, like I had just experienced something that shouldn't have been possible. But the moment I tried to convince myself that it wasn't real, I caught sight of something on the floor. It was a handkerchief, stained with dark red marks, lying in front of the freezer. My breath caught in my throat. I knew that handkerchief. It was Sarah's, a handkerchief she always kept in her apron pocket. But Sarah wasn't anywhere near me. Suddenly, the lights flickered again, and a low, raspy voice echoed through the store. "They are not done with you." The store was not just haunted. It was alive, and it was growing stronger. I wasn't alone. The spirits were awakening again, their rage rising, and it was only a matter of time before they came for me. The darkness spreads. The days that followed were a blur of exhaustion, anxiety, and terror. I no longer felt safe anywhere in the store. The oppressive weight of the curse seemed to follow me, creeping into my every waking moment. Each time I passed by a corner, I felt eyes watching me, and every creak of the floorboards made my heart skip a beat. I had to go back. I had to know more. I had to find the source of the curse that bound the store, the one that kept the spirits trapped within its walls forever. The question burned in my mind as I approached the basement stairs, the same stairs I had avoided so many times before. There was something in that dark, cold space, a secret buried deep in the heart of Blackwood Grocery. I didn't know if I was ready for the answers I would find, but I knew that I had no choice. The store was calling to me, and I couldn't ignore it any longer. Part 5. The Final Hour. I had heard the stories. I'd listened to the rumors, but nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared me for the nightmare that would unfold that night. By the time I was nearing the end of my 5th shift, I felt as though I was walking on the edge of madness. Every corner of Blackwood Grocery felt haunted, every shadow a threat, and the walls themselves seemed to whisper with voices from the past. The day had started like any other. The store was relatively quiet, the usual hum of the refrigerators filling the air, the flickering lights casting their strange shadows on the walls. But the oppressive weight in the air, the feeling that something was coming, was unmistakable. It felt like the store itself was holding its breath, waiting for something. I tried to push it aside, focus on my task, restocking the shelves, checking the inventory. But I couldn't ignore the growing unease gnawing at the back of my mind. I had learned to trust my instincts, and they were telling me something was terribly wrong. It wasn't until midnight, just as I was walking past the deli counter, that I first heard it. A faint sound, just barely audible at first. A low, deep groan that seemed to come from the walls themselves. I froze, my breath caught in my chest, and the hairs on my arm stood on end. The noise was like the sound of something ancient, something alive, trapped in the very bones of the building. I looked toward the deli section where the lights flickered again, stronger this time, a warning. That's when I saw her. At the far end of the counter, the same woman who had appeared to me in the storage room weeks earlier, Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwood. She stood there as she had before, her form barely more than a silhouette against the cold, harsh light. This time, though, there was no mistaking it. I could see the details: her dark, tattered dress, her skin pale as death, and her hollow, dark eyes that seemed to stare straight into my soul. But what terrified me more than her appearance was the fact that she wasn't alone. The others were there too. The figures, the spirits of those who had perished long ago. They were moving slowly, almost imperceptibly, around the deli counter, their hands stretched out as if reaching for something or someone. Their faces were twisted in agony, mouths open in screams that were silent. But I could hear them. The scream echoed in my mind, reverberating in my skull, filling me with an overwhelming sense of dread. The room grew colder, and the growl, that deep, guttural sound, started again, louder now. The walls seemed to vibrate with it, as if the very foundation of the store was shaking with the anger of the souls trapped within it. I wanted to run, to scream, but my body wouldn't obey. I was paralyzed, caught between the living and the dead. "You must help us." The words came from Mrs. Blackwood's lips, her voice colder than the air around us. It wasn't a plea. It wasn't a request. It was an order. Before I could react, the room seemed to distort. The lights overhead flickered violently, and the shadows grew, twisting into shapes that shouldn't exist. The deli counter began to shake, the metal trays rattling violently. The refrigerator hums grew louder, distorted, as if something was trying to break free from inside. In the corner of my vision, I saw it, a figure rising from behind the meat slicer. A tall, thin man, his skin taut and gray, his face barely recognizable as human. He moved toward me, each step leaving a trail of black ooze that spread across the floor like something alive. I couldn't breathe. The air in the store thickened, becoming suffocating. I turned to run, but the floor beneath me seemed to shift. The tiles warped, twisting beneath my feet as if the ground itself was trying to swallow me whole. I stumbled, caught off guard by the sudden shift in reality. And then I heard it, a voice that was unmistakable. "You're not going anywhere." I spun around, my heart hammering in my chest. There, standing at the end of the aisle, was Joe, the night manager. But something was wrong. His eyes were wide, too wide, his pupils black voids, and his skin was pale and stretched tight against his skull. "Joe," I gasped, my voice cracking. "Joe, what's happening? What's going on?" He didn't respond, he just smiled. But it wasn't a smile. It was a mockery of one, his lips pulling back too far, showing teeth that were sharp and jagged, as if they had been filed down to points. He took a step forward, his movements jerky, inhuman. His hands twitched and clenched into fists, as though he was fighting something within himself, something trying to break free. I backed away slowly, unable to look away from his terrifying, twisted face. Suddenly, the temperature in the store plummeted. I could see my breath clouding in the cold, and the walls creaked, a low, groaning sound that vibrated in my bones. The lights flickered again, this time more violently. The room swayed as if I were trapped in a storm, unable to find my footing. Then the growl returned, louder than ever. But it wasn't just coming from the walls. It was coming from inside Joe's mouth. His lips pulled back in a grotesque rictus, his chest rising and falling with each deep, labored breath. I turned to run, but the door to the stockroom slammed shut with a deafening crash. I was trapped. Trapped in the store with these spirits, with Joe, and whatever horrors were coming next. I backed into the corner of the store, clutching my flashlight like a weapon. I could hear the movement around me now, more footsteps, more whispers, more cries. The spirits were coming, drawn to the fear that radiated from me, their hunger palpable. And then I saw it. A figure emerging from the shadows near the back of the store. It was tall, its arms long and gangly, its eyes wide open and unblinking. The creature stepped forward, its movements jerky and unnatural, as though its bones were cracking with every step. I couldn't make out its face, but I could feel its presence, its malice, its desire to hurt. It was close. So close I could feel its cold, dead breath on the back of my neck. It spoke, and its voice was like scraping metal grating against my ears. You should not have come. I couldn't take it anymore. I had to leave. I turned toward the door to the freezer room, desperate to escape. But before I could reach it, a cold hand grabbed my wrist, pulling me back. I screamed, thrashing against the grip, but it only tightened. I looked up and saw Joe, his face twisted in a grotesque expression, his eyes filled with something that was no longer human. He wasn't just trying to stop me from leaving. He was holding me there. The room began to spin. The walls seemed to close in on me, the figures closing in from all directions, their empty eyes locked on me. And then everything stopped. For a brief moment the store fell silent. No whispers, no growls, no footsteps. I opened my eyes, and before me, standing just beyond the deli counter, was the figure of Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwood. She was still as a statue, but this time her face had changed. Her lips were twisted in an eerie smile, her eyes glowing with an unnatural light. You were meant to be part of this. Her voice was low but powerful, and it sent chills through my entire body. You're part of the family now, whether you like it or not. The clock ticks down. The air around me shifted once again, the oppressive cold returning with a vengeance. I could feel it deep in my bones. The curse that had been set in motion when Wilhelm Blackwood had made his deal all those years ago. And now I was part of it. The question was no longer whether I could leave. It was whether I could survive what was coming next. Time was running out and the spirits were coming for me. Part 6. The Awakening. The moment the door to the stockroom slammed shut behind me, I knew I wasn't just trapped in a building anymore. I was locked inside a nightmare. A living, breathing nightmare, where the walls themselves seemed to pulse with dark energy. The temperature had dropped so sharply that my breath fogged in front of me, the cold seeping into my bones like ice. My eyes darted around the dimly lit store, and for the first time, I truly understood what it meant to feel watched. I wasn't just in Blackwood Grocery, I was in its domain. The spirits were no longer whispering. They were growing louder. Their voices filled the room, all talking over each other, their words unintelligible, a maddening cacophony. I clutched my flashlight, its weak beam shaking in my hand as the shadows stretched unnaturally around me. The walls seemed to shift, contracting and expanding, as if the store itself were alive, breathing, shifting its shape to trap me in its grasp. I was surrounded by the dead. They were in the corners of my vision, in every shadow, their movements swift and unnatural. Their pale faces and hollow eyes watched me from the dark, waiting for something, waiting for me to make a choice. I backed away, heart hammering in my chest. I needed to leave. I needed to escape. But the very air around me felt heavy, pressing against my chest, stealing my breath. I couldn't move. My feet felt like they were stuck to the ground, as if something in the store was holding me there, forcing me to witness the terror that was unfolding. And then I saw it. A figure emerged from the darkness slowly. At first it was just a blur, an indistinct shadow. But as it stepped forward, I could make out the outline of a man, or what had once been a man. He was tall, impossibly so, his limbs unnaturally long, twisted in ways that defied the human form. His skin was stretched tight over his bones, pale and mottled, and his mouth hung open, revealing rows of jagged, rotting teeth. I froze. The growl in the air grew louder, vibrating through my body, and the screams, those horrible, silent screams, started again. But this time they weren't in my head. They were all around me. They were inside the walls, coming from every direction. The figure stepped forward again, and I felt my heart sink into my stomach. He wasn't alone. Behind him I saw them, more figures. One by one they appeared, emerging from the corners, from behind shelves, from the shadows that had once been safe. They were all around me. Some of them were solid, their features twisted in agony, while others were barely more than translucent shapes, their outlines flickering in and out of existence. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I was surrounded by the spirits of those who had died here, trapped in the cursed grip of Blackwood Grocery. The same curse that had claimed their souls decades ago, binding them to the store, forcing them to repeat their roles over and over again for eternity. I tried to scream, but no sound came out. The spirits closed in on me, their hands reaching for me with desperation, their mouths open in silent pleas. Some reached for my throat, their cold fingers wrapping around my skin like chains. I could feel the coldness of their touch, as if they were draining the warmth from my body. "Help us! Help us!" The whispers came from every direction, their voices pleading, but there was no escape. I had to stay. I had to bear witness to this nightmare. I stumbled backward, but the store seemed to grow larger, stretching further into the darkness. The aisles expanded, the shelves growing taller and taller until they seemed to tower above me, their shadows casting long, twisting forms on the floor. The growl from the walls grew louder, more insistent. I tried to break free, but the walls closed in on me. I turned to run, but the shadows were everywhere, closing around me like a noose. They weren't going to let me go. Then the lights flickered again. This time, they didn't just flicker, they exploded in a burst of white light, blinding me for a moment. When my vision cleared, I found myself no longer standing in the store, but in another place altogether. I wasn't sure where I was. It looked like the store, but it was different. The walls were stained and aged, the air thick with the smell of decay. The shelves were empty, the shelves I had passed countless times now covered in thick layers of dust. Nothing moved, except for the figure standing in the center of the room. It was him, the same tall man who had been chasing me. But now he was different. His skin was rotting, his eyes hollow and empty. His mouth hung open in a grotesque grin, revealing rows of broken, jagged teeth. He reached out, his arms stretched impossibly long, his hands grasping at the air. "You shouldn't have come here." His voice echoed in the empty space, reverberating through my mind, filling my ears with a low, droning hum that seemed to come from all directions at once. His words weren't just a threat, they were an invitation. I took a step back, my breath coming in shallow gasps. The ground beneath me seemed to pulse with a dark energy, and the store around me began to change again. The walls bent and twisted, reshaping themselves into forms that didn't belong. Familiar faces, those who had worked here before, now twisted into monstrous shapes, emerged from the shadows, their bodies contorted, their eyes blank and vacant. One by one, the spirits of Blackwood Grocery came forward, their hollow eyes fixed on me, their bodies decayed and ravaged by time. They moved like shadows, floating towards me with the kind of slow, deliberate movement that made your blood run cold. "You belong to us now." The voice came from all around me, a chorus of whispers rising from the spirits as they circled me, trapping me in place. I tried to scream, but the air around me thickened, pressing against my chest, suffocating me. I reached for the door, but it was gone. The store was no longer the store. It had transformed into something else, something ancient, something far older than I could comprehend. The growl returned, louder than ever, and the walls seemed to close in. The spirits were all around me now, their cold hands gripping me, pulling me deeper into the heart of the store, into the dark, rotting core of Blackwood Grocery. I felt their fingers digging into my skin, their touch cold as death. The shadows pressed in closer, the darkness suffocating, pulling me toward the center of the store. The walls twisted and warped, the aisles stretching out like endless corridors, leading me deeper into the dark heart of this place. The growl grew louder, more deafening. I could feel the store breathing around me, the very foundation of Blackwood Grocery alive with the ancient curse that had bound it all together. The spirits were calling to me, pulling me into their web, their endless nightmare. And then, as if answering their call, the floor beneath me split open, revealing the dark abyss below. The aftermath. I woke up gasping for air, my heart racing in my chest. I was back in the real world, or so it seemed. The store was empty, the lights dimming overhead, the hum of the refrigerators a distant sound. I was alone again, but I felt different, changed somehow. Was it a dream? I wasn't sure anymore. As I stood there staring at the empty aisles of Blackwood Grocery, I heard it again, the growl, soft but unmistakable. I turned to look, but no one was there. The lights flickered one more time, and in the darkness I knew the spirits weren't done with me yet. Part 7, The Last Stand. The night I stepped back into the cursed walls of Blackwood Grocery, everything felt wrong. I had hoped that maybe, just maybe, I'd get some sleep, some relief from the horrors that had haunted me for weeks. But as soon as the store's old wooden door slammed behind me, sealing me inside, I knew that peace was a fleeting dream. There was no escaping what lurked in the shadows here. I'd started to notice the signs of decay in the building more clearly now. The walls had started to peel, and there was a persistent smell, like something rotting just beneath the surface. It wasn't the usual stale air that came with an old building. It was something worse, something alive. I checked the clock. It was 2:45 a.m. The store was completely dead, no customers, no noise except for the buzzing hum of the fridges and freezers. I began my usual rounds, trying to focus on work to keep my mind from wandering to the shadows in the corners of my vision. As I walked past the dairy section, I noticed something strange. The milk cartons were all aligned perfectly, facing outward. Too perfect. But it wasn't just that, they had been touched. The labels, the ones that had always been yellow, now seemed to fade, becoming almost transparent, like the ink had faded out of them. I reached for one, but before my fingers could touch the carton, the lights flickered once again, cutting through the darkness like jagged, broken glass. A strange sound followed, a low hum that grew louder with each passing second, vibrating through the floor, the walls, the very air I breathed. The air felt thick, like I was breathing through water. I glanced around. The entire store felt alive, aware, like it was watching me, waiting for me to make a mistake. I turned back to the milk cartons, and that's when I saw it, a figure standing at the far end of the aisle. I froze. A woman. No, a ghost. She was standing still, her pale, translucent form flickering in and out of existence like a broken TV. Her face was twisted in a permanent expression of grief, her eyes hollow and empty, black pits of despair that pulled me in. She wore a long, tattered dress, faded and torn by time, and her hands hung limply at her sides, fingers just a fraction too long. I could feel the darkness around me deepen. The temperature dropped so quickly I could see my breath fogging in front of me. The whispering began again, soft at first, like a faint breeze in the distance. But it grew louder, closer, until it was almost deafening. "You shouldn't have come back." Her voice was raspy, a voice that had been trapped in the walls of Blackwood Grocery for far too long. It reverberated through my skull, crawling under my skin like insects. The growl started again. This time it was different. It wasn't just coming from the walls, the shadows, or the floor. It was coming from inside me. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't obey. My body froze as if the air itself was holding me in place. I was trapped in Blackwood Grocery, its malevolent spirit wrapping around me, suffocating me. Then she spoke again. "You're part of it now, part of us. Forever." Before I could react, the woman's form flickered violently, and in a flash she was standing directly in front of me, too close for comfort, her face contorted with madness. Her hand shot out, and before I could scream, her fingers wrapped around my wrist. Her touch was ice cold, colder than any freezer I'd ever felt, colder than the depths of the ocean. My bones felt like they were freezing, shattering under the pressure of her grip. I gasped, trying to pull away, but her hand held me in place. Her mouth opened wide, revealing rows of teeth, too sharp, too jagged, and she spoke again. "We never leave." I struggled, my breath ragged, panic starting to take over. My heart hammered against my ribcage, each beat like a drum, urging me to fight to get away. But it was too late. The store had already claimed me. With a final, sickening twist, she yanked me closer, pulling me into her embrace, and for a split second I saw something in her eyes, a glimpse of what she had been, what she had once been before the curse took her soul. She was Elizabeth Blackwood, the woman who had been the cornerstone of this damned place. And now she had me. She had all of us. Suddenly, the cold around me seemed to shatter, and I was yanked away from her grip, thrown back against the shelves. The lights flickered again, and the whole room seemed to warp, bending and twisting in unnatural ways. The walls stretched and groaned like they were alive, and the whispering grew louder, until I couldn't distinguish between the voices of the dead and the pounding of my own heart. I looked up. There was no way out. The spirits had surrounded me. They were no longer just shadows in the dark. They were real, standing before me, alive in their own way. Their faces were distorted, their bodies decayed beyond recognition, but their eyes, those hollow, empty eyes, they were alive with something ancient, something malevolent. I tried to scream, but no sound came. They were coming closer. One by one, the spirits reached out, their hands skeletal, fingers long and twisted, as they beckoned me into the darkness. Their voices filled my ears, their words a mixture of anger, pain, and an overwhelming need. "Come to us." Suddenly there was a sharp snap, a violent sound that broke through the silence of the store. The lights went out completely, and I was plunged into darkness. The growl, now deafening, vibrated through the very floor beneath me, shaking my teeth, rattling my skull. In that moment, I realized what I had to do. I had to break the curse. I knew I couldn't escape. The spirits weren't just haunting Blackwood Grocery. They were bound to it, trapped by the ancient bargain made by Wilhelm Blackwood all those years ago. But the curse could be broken. It had to be. I had to take Wilhelm's place. In the absolute darkness, I heard a voice, deep and guttural, rising above the others. It was Elizabeth Blackwood, and her voice was filled with something I hadn't heard before: hope. "You can free us." The sound of chains rattling filled the air, and in that moment I understood. I was the final piece, the key to breaking the curse. But it came with a price. I had to stay. I had to become part of the store. I had a choice. I could run. I could leave, try to escape this nightmare and go back to my life. But there was no escaping Blackwood Grocery now. And as I stood there, surrounded by the spirits of the past, I knew one thing for certain: I was never going to leave. Not until the curse was broken. I stepped forward toward the spirits, toward the darkness. The store had claimed me, but I would claim it back. Part 8, The Aftermath. I should have known better than to believe that Blackwood Grocery would ever let me go. The moment I made the decision to confront the curse, to face the spirits and their unrelenting grip on the store, I sealed my fate. The air was thick with their presence now. Each breath I took felt like I was inhaling the very soul of the place, tainted by death and regret. But I wasn't alone. As the curse began to shift and evolve, I noticed the subtle changes around me, the lights flickering more violently, the cold creeping up from the floor, the whispers that echoed in my skull at all hours of the day and night. The spirits were waking, but they weren't the only ones. There was something else in the store, something new, something far darker than anything I had encountered before. And it watched me. I felt its gaze on me constantly, a cold, suffocating presence lurking just beyond the shadows, just beyond the corners of my sight. I knew it wasn't human. I knew it was something far more malevolent, far more dangerous. It moved like smoke, shifting between the aisles with impossible speed, always just out of reach. There were moments when I would turn and catch a glimpse of it, just a flash of movement in the corner of my eye, always hidden in the darkness, its form shifting and changing. It had no face, just a twisted, grotesque silhouette, and every time I saw it I would hear that sound. The sound that sent chills down my spine. The laughter. It wasn't a normal laugh. It wasn't even human. It was a raspy, guttural cackle, as if it had been trapped in the darkness for centuries, driven mad by its isolation. It would echo through the empty aisles, filling the store with a sickening sound that made the very walls tremble. I wasn't sure if it was a spirit, a demon, or something else entirely, but I knew it was watching me. It didn't want to hurt me, not directly. It wanted something far more insidious. It wanted me to fear it, to feel trapped in the store, to know that no matter how hard I tried, I could never leave. And then there were the smiles. It started innocently enough. One night, while I was stocking shelves near the back of the store, I glanced up and saw a figure standing just beyond the shadows of the aisle. At first I thought it was a fellow employee, maybe Joe or Sarah, just lingering in the dark, waiting for me. But as I looked closer, I realized it wasn't anyone I knew. This figure was tall, unnaturally tall, with long, skeletal limbs that seemed to bend in impossible directions. Its body was cloaked in dark robes that rippled like smoke, and its face was obscured, but I could still see its eyes. Two hollow pits of blackness, filled with nothing but darkness. And then it smiled. The grin stretched across its face, far too wide, far too sharp. It wasn't a smile of kindness. It was a ravenous, maniacal grin, like something that wanted to tear me apart and consume what was left. Its teeth gleamed like daggers, sharp and jagged, and I felt an icy chill seep into my very soul as I realized it wasn't just smiling at me. It was smiling because it knew my fear. I took a step back, my body trembling with the instinctive urge to flee, but my legs wouldn't move. I was rooted to the spot, caught between terror and disbelief. The figure in the shadows didn't move at first. It just stood there watching me, grinning as the darkness around it seemed to shift and twist. And then, as I blinked, it was gone. I didn't understand it. I couldn't explain it. But that moment changed everything. I wasn't just dealing with the spirits of the past anymore. The store was alive, breathing with something ancient, something far more malevolent. The next few days were a blur of unease, with every creak of the floorboards, every flicker of the lights, sending waves of dread through my body. The spirits were restless, their whispers louder now, their hands reaching out for me, dragging me deeper into the darkness. But I couldn't fight them, not yet. I knew I had to finish what I started. I had to break the curse, to free the souls trapped within the store and destroy the dark force that had taken root in its heart. I had heard the stories, the ones that Joe had muttered in passing, the ones Sarah had hinted at when she thought I wasn't listening. The stories about the original Blackwood family and the deal they had made. The deal that had bound their souls to the store, trapping them here for eternity. But there was one story that stood out above all the others. It was said that the ritual to break the curse had been lost to time, hidden away in the deepest corners of Blackwood Grocery. There were fragments of it in the old ledgers, bits and pieces of the original Blackwood family records, scattered throughout the store. And I knew that if I could piece it all together, I might be able to free them, free us. But there was a cost. The ritual was dangerous. It required a life, someone willing to give themselves to the store in exchange for freedom. The curse would only be broken if someone stepped into the heart of the store, sacrificing themselves to tear down the walls that held the spirits trapped here. The thought of it sent chills down my spine. I didn't know if I was strong enough to go through with it, but I had no choice. It was the night of the full moon when I finally decided to perform the ritual. The store was dead silent, the shadows deepening as the moonlight streamed through the dirty windows. The growl that had haunted me for weeks was now a distant hum, barely audible but ever present in the back of my mind. I made my way to the back room, the place where everything had started. The place where I had first encountered the spirits, where I had first heard the whispers and felt the hands of the dead reaching for me. The room was empty now, silent, save for the cold that seemed to hang in the air. I stepped into the center of the room, my hands shaking as I held the old ritual book that had been hidden in the storage room. I opened the book, my eyes scanning the ancient text, and began to recite the words. The air thickened as I spoke, growing heavier, colder. The walls seemed to breathe, and the shadows in the corners began to twist and churn, as though something was moving just beneath the surface. I continued the incantation, my voice growing stronger with each word. And then the growls started again, this time louder. It wasn't just coming from the walls anymore. It was inside me, reverberating through my body, shaking my very soul. I could hear the footsteps, slow, deliberate, coming closer, growing louder. The figure, the one that had been watching me, was here. It stepped into the room, its tall, skeletal form looming in the doorway. Its maniacal smile spread across its face, its teeth glinting in the dim light. It spoke, its voice low and dripping with malice. "You should have stayed away. You can't break the curse. You belong to us now," but I didn't stop. I kept chanting, louder now, louder than I had ever spoken before. "You belong to the store. You belong to Blackwood. We are all bound here." The figure stepped forward, its hand reaching out to touch me, but before it could, a blinding light erupted from the center of the room. The walls shook, the ground beneath me cracked open, and the room was filled with the sound of thousands of voices screaming. The light grew brighter, engulfing everything. The spirits, the ones who had been trapped for so long, began to rise, their forms flickering like candles in the wind. Their faces, twisted in agony and pain, began to disintegrate, the curse slowly breaking apart as the light consumed everything around us. I felt the weight lift from my shoulders. The air grew warm again, the cold vanishing as the last remnants of the curse faded into nothing. But the figure, the one that had been watching me, was still there. "This isn't over," it whispered just before it was consumed by the light. And then silence. The store was free. When I woke up, everything was different. The store had changed. The air was no longer heavy with the weight of the past. The shadows were gone and the whispering had stopped. For the first time since I had set foot in Blackwood Grocery, the store felt empty, but not in a haunting way. It was empty in the way a room is when the tension is released, when the fear is no longer there. The spirits were gone, the curse was broken. I walked out into the quiet, empty streets of Salem, the moonlight casting a soft glow on everything around me. I was free. And yet, as I looked back at Blackwood Grocery, I knew I would never truly be free of it. It had become a part of me, just as I had become a part of it. I had left the store, but the darkness would always be with me. If you want to hear more about the mysteries of Blackwood Grocery and the darkness that lies within, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Stay tuned for more stories that will keep you up at night. After everything that happened at Blackwood Grocery, I often found myself questioning the reality of what I experienced. There were times when the memories would haunt me, those whispers in the dark, the cold, the shadows that seemed to have a life of their own. There were moments when I would lie awake at night, my heart racing, and I would wonder if it was all just a nightmare, a manifestation of the fear and exhaustion that had plagued me during those terrifying weeks. But deep down, I knew the truth. The truth that Blackwood Grocery had been more than just a place. It had been a living entity, a supernatural force that had held its employees captive for generations. Its curse wasn't just tied to the land, to the store's foundation. It was woven into the very fabric of time, stretching back centuries, trapping the souls of those who worked there, feeding off their fear and binding them to its walls. The spirits of those long dead weren't just haunting the store, they were part of it, and I was no exception. I had become trapped just like them. The store had a way of drawing people in, consuming them, breaking them down piece by piece until there was nothing left but the desire to keep working, to keep serving, to keep existing. At first it was subtle, the strange noises, the flickering lights, the cold spots in the aisles. But as time went on, it became more insistent. The whispers grew louder, the figures more real, and the fear it was palpable. I remember the first time I saw Mrs. Elizabeth Blackwood, her hollow eyes staring at me from the shadows. She wasn't just a ghost. She was a warning. And when I realized that the store wasn't just haunted but alive with something far more malevolent, something ancient and hungry, it was already too late. But even in the face of that fear, I couldn't turn away. I couldn't just leave, because there was something else at play here. The store wasn't just trapping us in a cycle of terror, it was giving us a choice. And that choice, when I finally understood it, was the key to breaking the curse. At first, I didn't realize it. I thought I was just an observer, someone caught in the web of Blackwood Grocery, powerless to break free. But as I began to piece together the fragments of the past, the missing pieces of the ritual, I realized that I wasn't just meant to witness the horror, I was meant to end it. In the end, I made a choice. A choice that was far more difficult than anything I could have imagined. To take the place of those trapped in the store, to break the curse, to free the spirits, to take on the weight of a sacrifice that would save everyone else. I had to step into the heart of the store, face the darkness, and destroy it from within. It wasn't easy. The spirits fought back, trying to pull me in, trying to break my resolve. But I fought through it, using the knowledge I had gained, the strength that had been awakened in me, and the belief that I could finally free us all. And in the end, it worked. The ritual was completed. The store was freed from the grip of the curse. The spirits were no longer bound to Blackwood Grocery. The darkness that had consumed the place for so long finally dissipated. But the price of that freedom was high. In the process of breaking the curse, I became a part of the store, too. The shadows that once haunted the aisles, the spirits that wandered through the broken walls, they had moved on. But I was still there in some form, a remnant of the curse. A piece of Blackwood Grocery that would never truly leave. The story of Blackwood Grocery is more than just a tale of hauntings, curses, and spirits. It's a story about facing our deepest fears, not running from them, but confronting them head-on, even when they seem impossible to defeat. It's a story about finding strength in the midst of darkness, about understanding that sometimes the path to freedom isn't easy, and it certainly isn't free of pain. It's about sacrifice, resilience, and the understanding that no matter how deeply we're trapped by the circumstances of our lives, we have the power to break free. At the heart of the story is the realization that the darkness we face is not something external. It's something that we all carry within us. It's the fear, the doubt, the guilt, the shame, and the regret that bind us to our own past. We are often prisoners of our own minds, trapped in cycles of negative thinking, stuck in toxic patterns that seem impossible to escape. But just like the spirits in Blackwood Grocery, we are not truly trapped unless we allow ourselves to be. The lesson here is simple. We are the ones who hold the key to our own freedom. We can break free from the cycles that hold us back, the fears that paralyze us, the regrets that haunt us. But it requires something difficult, a willingness to face the darkness, to accept it, and to transform it into something better. In my journey at Blackwood Grocery, I learned that we must sometimes sacrifice parts of ourselves to move forward. There is always a cost to change, a cost that might be painful or difficult, but it's through that sacrifice that we can grow and ultimately find freedom. Just as I had to face the curse in order to break it, we must face our own struggles in order to move beyond them. But the most important part of the story is this: no darkness is eternal. No matter how deep the shadows may seem, there is always a way to bring in the light. The light may not be as bright as we hope, but it is always enough to guide us through the darkest moments. Even after all the horrors I experienced, I learned that I was stronger than I realized. And when we find our strength, we can overcome anything, no matter how haunting the past may be. In our everyday lives, we face challenges, struggles, and moments of deep uncertainty. There are times when the weight of our fears, doubts, and regrets seems unbearable. Whether it's personal loss, failure, or the fear of the unknown, it can feel like we are walking through our own Blackwood Grocery, trapped in a place of darkness and fear. But the key to breaking free lies within each of us. Just as I had to face the darkness at Blackwood Grocery, you must confront your own fears, regrets, and doubts. Acknowledge them, embrace them, and then let them go. Only then can you break the chains that hold you back and move forward with strength and clarity. Life isn't about avoiding fear. It's about learning how to face it, how to transform it, and how to find the courage to move forward even when it feels impossible. Like the spirits that haunted Blackwood Grocery, we too can be trapped by our pasts, but we have the power to change the course of our future. We can choose to be the ones who free ourselves, just as I did by breaking the curse. You have that power too. If you found something in this story that resonates with you, something that speaks to your own struggles or fears, I encourage you to subscribe to this channel. Support the channel by clicking the bell icon so you don't miss out on future stories that dive deeper into the human experience, the supernatural, and the incredible power of transformation. This journey is far from over, and I need your support to continue sharing these powerful stories. Thank you for joining me in this journey. Together, we can face the darkness and find the light.